Montana Territory, 1885. The blizzard came without warning, a howling wall of white that transformed the rolling prairie into a frozen wasteland within hours. Cole Harrington hunched low in his saddle, squinting against the sting of ice crystals that pelted his face like tiny needles. His buckskin gelding labored forward, head down against the relentless wind that threatened to topple them both. Just a little farther, Echo, Cole urged, his voice barely audible above the storm's fury. We'll find shelter soon. At 23, Cole had weathered his share of Montana winters, but this storm had caught him unprepared. He'd been riding fence line for the Broken Spur, a modest spread where he'd worked as a hand for nearly 2 years. The sky had been clear that morning, with only a hint of clouds on the northern horizon. By noon, those clouds had swallowed the sun, and by mid-afternoon, the world had vanished in a swirling vortex of white. Cole knew his situation was dire. The temperature was plummeting, and the nearest known shelter, the Line Shack, was at least 5 miles east. Or was it southeast? The landmarks had disappeared, and with them, his sense of direction. His fingers, despite the thick leather gloves, had grown numb. His face burned from the cold, and a dangerous drowsiness tugged at his consciousness. Stay awake, he commanded himself. Keep moving. Just as despair threatened to overtake him, Echo's head lifted. The horse nickered softly, ears pricking forward. Cole strained to see through the whiteout conditions, but saw nothing beyond the curtain of snow. What is it, boy? You sense something. The horse changed direction slightly, moving with newfound purpose. Cole gave the animal its head, trusting the instincts that had served them well before. Minutes stretched like hours as they pushed forward, until finally, a dark shape materialized ahead, the shadowy outline of a structure. As they drew closer, Cole could make out a small cabin, its windows dark. Smoke curled from the chimney, barely visible against the white sky. Hope surged through him. "Hello," he called, dismounting with difficulty, his legs stiff with cold. "Anybody there?" No answer came. Cole led Echo to the lee side of the cabin, where a crude lean-to offered minimal shelter. He secured the horse, promising to return with feed if possible, then staggered to the door. He knocked, waited, then knocked harder. "Hello? I'm caught in the storm. Need shelter." When no response came, he tested the door. It swung open, revealing a dark interior illuminated only by the dying embers in the hearth. Cole stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. "Hello," he called again. The cabin appeared empty, though signs of recent habitation were evident. A copper kettle hung near the fire, and a half-eaten meal sat on a small table. He moved to the fireplace, adding wood from the stack nearby, bringing the flames back to life. As warmth began to seep into the room, Cole noticed something that made his blood run cold despite the growing heat. A figure lay crumpled on the floor near the bed, partially hidden by a fallen chair. Cole rushed forward, kneeling beside what he now recognized as a woman. She lay unnaturally still, her face pale. For a terrible moment, he feared she was dead, but then detected the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by concern. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" He gently touched her shoulder. She didn't respond. A small gash on her temple had left a trickle of dried blood down her cheek. Cole carefully lifted her, marveling at how light she seemed despite her tall frame, and placed her on the narrow bed. He removed her boots, but left her clothing intact out of propriety, covering her with the thick quilt that had fallen to the floor. Only then, in the growing firelight, did he truly see her. She was young, perhaps 20 or 21, with a delicate face framed by hair the color of burnished copper. Her skin was fair, dusted with freckles across her nose, and her riding clothes, though practical, were of finer quality than most ranch women could afford. Cole wet a cloth and gently cleaned the blood from her face. What had happened here? Had she fallen? Been attacked? And why was she alone in this remote cabin during a blizzard? As questions multiplied in his mind, the woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. When they opened, Cole found himself staring into eyes the color of summer sage. "Who?" she began, then winced, raising a hand to her temple. "Easy there," Cole said, keeping his voice soft. "My name's Cole Harrington. I got caught in the blizzard and found your cabin. You were unconscious when I came in." Fear flickered across her face. "How long have you been here?" "Just arrived, ma'am. The storm came up fast." She tried to sit up, then fell back with a groan. I must have hit my head when I fell. I was feeling dizzy earlier. You should rest, Cole advised. That's a nasty cut. The woman studied him with wary eyes. I'm Julia Lawrence, she finally said. This is my hunting cabin. Cole nodded, relieved she was lucid enough to introduce herself. Pleased to meet you, Miss Lawrence, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Mrs., she corrected, though no wedding band adorned her finger. I'm widowed. The revelation surprised him. She seemed too young to have already known both marriage and loss. My condolences, Mrs. Lawrence. Cole stood awkwardly. If you'll point me to where you keep your supplies, I can fix us something to eat. And I need to tend to my horse. Julia directed him to a storage area, and Cole busied himself caring for Echo, bringing the gelding oats and water. When he returned, he found Julia sitting up, her head in her hands. You really shouldn't be up yet, he chided gently. I'm fine, she insisted, though her pallor suggested otherwise. Just a bit dizzy. Cole set about preparing a simple meal from the cabin's supplies: beans, salt pork, and coffee. As he worked, he felt Julia's eyes following his movements. You're not from around here, she observed. No, ma'am. I work at the Broken Spur, about 20 miles southwest. She nodded, a curious expression crossing her face. Foreman, there is Silas Thornton, isn't it? That's right. Cole glanced at her with renewed interest. You know him? Our paths have crossed. Her tone revealed nothing, but Cole sensed there was a story there. Before he could probe further, Julia changed the subject. What brought you out in weather like this? Cole explained about riding fence line, about the storm's sudden arrival. As he spoke, the wind outside intensified, rattling the cabin's windows. Sounds like we're in for a long night, Julia remarked, her gaze drifting to the door. Perhaps longer. Winter storms in this territory can last for days. The prospect of being stranded with this mysterious woman both intrigued and unsettled Cole. There was something about Julia Lawrence that didn't quite fit, a refined quality that seemed at odds with her presence alone in a remote cabin. May I ask what brings you out here, Mrs. Lawrence? It's pretty isolated. A shadow passed over her face. Sometimes isolation is exactly what one needs, Mr. Harrington. The evasive answer only piqued Cole's curiosity further. Who was this woman, and what was she hiding from? As the evening progressed, Julia gradually revealed fragments of her story. She'd come west from Boston 3 years earlier as a new bride, only to lose her husband Thomas to pneumonia just 8 months after their arrival. He left me everything, she said, her voice carefully controlled, including responsibilities I never imagined I'd have. Must have been difficult, a young woman alone in the territory. You have no idea. Her smile held a bitterness that belied her youth. But we adapt, don't we? We survive. By the time they finished their simple meal, the storm had intensified to a shrieking fury that made conversation difficult. Cole added more wood to the fire, building it high against the penetrating cold that seeped through the cabin's walls. You should take the bed, he insisted. I'll be fine on the floor. Julia looked as if she might protest, but exhaustion and her injury won out. Thank you, she said simply, retreating to the bed while Cole made a pallet near the fire. In the dark hours of night, Cole woke to the sound of Julia crying out in her sleep. He sat up, unsure whether to intervene, when she suddenly bolted upright, gasping for breath. Are you all right? He asked softly. She startled at his voice, then seemed to remember where she was. Yes, just a dream. After a pause, she added, the same dream I always have. Cole waited, sensing she wanted to say more. I dream I'm trapped, she finally continued, her voice barely audible above the storm. Trapped in a life I never chose, playing a role I never wanted. The raw vulnerability in her admission stirred something in Cole, an unexpected protectiveness. What role is that? Julia didn't answer directly. Have you ever found yourself living someone else's vision, Mr. Harrington? Carrying out plans that were never your own? The question struck closer to home than Cole cared to admit. He'd come west 5 years earlier, fleeing the expectations of a father who demanded he follow in his footsteps as a Philadelphia banker. Maybe I have, he acknowledged. Then you understand why I come here, Julia said. This cabin is the one place where I'm not Mrs. Thomas Lawrence. Where I'm just Julia. The conversation lingered in Cole's mind long after Julia had fallen back asleep. What burden was this young widow carrying? What role had been thrust upon her that she so desperately needed escape from? Morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, it had intensified, burying the cabin in drifts that reached halfway up the windows. Cole stoked the fire and brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the small space. Julia appeared better. The color returned to her cheeks. She'd arranged her copper hair in a simple braid, and something about the casual style softened her features, making her appear even younger. "Looks like we're not going anywhere today," Cole observed, handing her a cup of coffee. "No," she agreed, her hands curling around the warm mug. "We're not." The forced proximity created an odd intimacy. As the day progressed, they shared stories. Cole about his childhood in Philadelphia, his break with his father, his journey west. Julia spoke of Boston, of her sheltered upbringing, of meeting Thomas Lawrence at a society function and being swept off her feet by his talk of adventure and opportunity in the Montana Territory. "He was quite a bit older," she admitted. "My parents disapproved, but I was headstrong. I thought I was escaping their control." A rueful smile touched her lips. "I didn't realize I was just exchanging one cage for another." "Your husband controlled you?" Cole asked carefully. Julia stared into the fire. "Thomas wasn't a cruel man, just ambitious. He had grand plans for building an empire out here. When he died, those plans became mine to fulfill." There was more to the story, Cole sensed, but he didn't press. Instead, he found wood to whittle, crafting a small horse from a piece of pine while Julia mended a tear in her riding skirt. The simple domesticity felt strangely right, as if they'd known each other far longer than a single day. By evening, the storm showed no sign of abating. Their conversation flowed more easily now, punctuated by comfortable silences. Cole discovered that beneath Julia's reserved exterior lay a sharp wit and intelligence that both surprised and delighted him. "You know," he said as they finished a dinner of stewed rabbit he'd found hanging in the cold storage, "for being trapped in a blizzard, this hasn't been half bad." Julia's smile reached her eyes for the first time. "No, it hasn't." She hesitated, then added, "I haven't spoken this freely with anyone since Thomas died." "Why is that?" Cole asked. "Because people see me differently now. They're either afraid of me or want something from me." Something in her expression closed off, as if she'd said too much. Cole wanted to understand what she meant, but before he could ask, a tremendous crack split the air. Both jumped to their feet as part of the roof gave way under the weight of accumulated snow, sending a cascade of white powder into the cabin. "The roof!" Julia cried. Cole was already moving, grabbing a broom to push back the snow while assessing the damage. A section near the rear of the cabin had partially collapsed, exposing rafters to the night sky. "We need to shore it up," he said, "or we'll lose the whole roof." Together, they worked frantically, Cole using pieces of firewood to brace the sagging rafters while Julia cleared away snow. The temperature in the cabin plummeted as wind and snow poured through the gap. "There's canvas in the storage room," Julia directed. "We can use it as a temporary patch." Cole found the heavy canvas and managed to secure it over the opening, stopping the immediate influx of snow. But the damage was done. The cabin had grown dangerously cold, and their woodpile was diminishing rapidly. "We'll have to conserve heat," Cole said, pushing the small table against one wall to create more space near the fire. "And conserve wood." Julia nodded, her breath visible in the chilled air. They dragged the mattress from the bed frame and placed it before the hearth, piling it with every blanket and fur in the cabin. "We should sleep close to the fire," Cole said, carefully neutral. "For warmth." If the suggestion made Julia uncomfortable, she didn't show it. "Yes, of course." They sat side by side on the mattress, the fire casting flickering shadows across their faces. Cole was acutely aware of Julia's proximity, of the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair despite their wilderness surroundings. "Tell me something about yourself that no one else knows," Julia said suddenly, her voice soft in the firelit darkness. Cole considered the request. "I write poetry," he admitted, feeling heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "Terrible poetry, probably, but I keep a journal full of it." Julia's delighted laugh warmed him more than the flames. "A cowboy poet. I'd never have guessed." "Your turn," he prompted. She grew quiet, gazing into the fire. "I never loved my husband," she finally said. "I respected him. I was grateful to him, but I never loved him." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Is that why you feel trapped? Cole asked gently. Because you're carrying on the legacy of a man you didn't love? Julia turned to face him, surprise evident in her expression. You understand more than most, Cole Harrington. The use of his first name shifted something between them. A boundary crossed, a formality abandoned. Julia, he said, testing her name on his lips. Whatever burdens you're carrying, you don't have to face them alone. She smiled sadly. That's a kind sentiment, but you don't know what you're offering. Then tell me, he urged. But Julia shook her head. Some revelations should wait for daylight, she said, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. We should try to sleep. They lay down side by side, a respectable distance between them despite the shared mattress. Cole stared at the rafters, listening to the howl of the wind and the soft rhythm of Julia's breathing. What secrets was this enigmatic woman keeping? What burden made her seek solitude in a remote cabin during the harshest season of the year? Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the need to add wood to the fire. Sometime in the night, Cole woke to find Julia shivering despite the blankets. Without thinking, he moved closer, offering his warmth. She tensed momentarily, then relaxed against him, her back to his chest. He draped an arm over her waist, a protective gesture that felt both daring and right. Thank you, she whispered, and whether she meant for the warmth or something more, Cole wasn't sure. Sleep, he murmured, and together they drifted off as the storm raged on. Dawn brought a change, not in the weather, which continued unabated, but in the air between them. Something had shifted during the night, a trust established, a connection formed. They moved around the cabin with a new awareness of each other, their hands occasionally brushing, their eyes meeting more often. As they shared breakfast, Julia suddenly asked, "What would you do if you could start over, Cole? If you could be anyone, do anything?" He considered the question. "I'd want my own ranch. Nothing fancy, just enough land for good grazing, a comfortable house, maybe a few horses to raise." He smiled, slightly embarrassed by the simplicity of his dream. "What about you?" "I'd paint," she said, surprising him. "Before I married, I studied art. My instructors said I had talent, but Thomas..." She trailed off. He thought it was a frivolous pursuit for a rancher's wife. "Do you still paint?" She shook her head. "No time. Too many responsibilities." "That's a shame," Cole said sincerely. "Dreams shouldn't be abandoned so easily." Julia's expression turned wistful. "Some dreams have to be sacrificed for duty, Cole." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden lull in the storm. They both glanced toward the windows, where the relentless white had given way to patches of gray. "It's breaking," Cole observed, moving to the frosted glass. "The worst is over." Julia joined him, standing close enough that their arms touched. "Yes," she agreed, though she didn't sound entirely pleased. "It won't be long before the trails are passable." The prospect of departure hung between them, neither willing to acknowledge the inevitable end to their forced companionship. "I should check on Echo," Cole said, reaching for his coat. Outside, the world had been transformed into a glittering white expanse. The snow had drifted higher than Cole's waist in places, but the wind had died to a gentle breeze. Echo nickered a greeting from the lean-to, where he'd weathered the storm in relative comfort. As Cole fed and watered the horse, he found himself reluctant to complete the task. Once the storm cleared enough for safe travel, he would have no reason to remain. He would return to the broken spur, to his life as a ranch hand, and Julia would. What? Return to whatever responsibilities weighed so heavily upon her. The thought of never seeing her again left an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. In just 2 days, this mysterious woman had awakened something in him he hadn't realized was dormant, a longing not just for companionship, but for connection with someone who saw beyond the surface. When he re-entered the cabin, Julia was packing her few personal items into a small valise. "Planning to leave soon?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "The storm's breaking," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "We'll both be able to return to our lives." "Julia," Cole began, then faltered, unsure what he wanted to say. That he didn't want this to end? That in the span of a blizzard, she had become important to him in ways he couldn't articulate? She paused, finally looking at him. "Yes." But whatever Cole might have said was interrupted by a sound outside, the distant jingle of harness bells. Both turned toward the window. "Riders," Cole said, peering through the glass. "3 of them." Julia moved beside him, her body tensing as she gazed out at the approaching horseman. "No," she whispered, her face suddenly pale. "Not now. You know them?" Cole asked, alarmed by her reaction. "Yes." Her voice was tight. "They work for me." Before Cole could process this information, Julia turned to him, her eyes intense. "Cole, listen carefully. These men cannot find us like this, alone together. My reputation, of course," he agreed immediately, understanding her concern. A young widow found alone with a man, regardless of the circumstances, would face brutal gossip. "I'll say I just arrived, that I found you injured." Gratitude flooded her face. "Thank you." They hastily rearranged the cabin, moving the mattress back to the bed frame, clearing away any evidence of their shared meals and conversations. By the time a heavy knock sounded at the door, the cabin presented an image of propriety. Julia answered, composing her features into a mask of cool dignity that Cole had not seen before. "Mr. Daniels," she greeted the foremost rider, a weathered man in his 50s. "What brings you out in such conditions?" The man removed his hat, revealing gray-streaked hair. "Mrs. Lawrence, thank the Lord you're safe. When you didn't return before the storm hit, we feared the worst. The moment the weather broke enough for travel, I gathered some men to search. As you can see, I'm quite all right," Julia replied. "My horse went lame, and I was fortunate to reach the cabin before the storm worsened." Only then did the man notice Cole, his expression immediately suspicious. "And who might this be?" Before Cole could answer, Julia smoothly intervened. "This is Mr. Harrington, from the Broken Spur. He arrived this morning, having been caught in the storm himself." Her tone left no room for questioning. "Mr. Harrington, this is Everett Daniels, my foreman." Cole nodded politely, noting the protective way Daniels watched Julia. More than an employee's concern for an employer, he thought. "Mrs. Lawrence had a fall," Cole explained. "I found her unconscious when I arrived." Daniel's suspicion visibly deepened. "Is that so?" He turned to Julia. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" "Just a bump on the head. Nothing serious," she assured him. "Mr. Harrington has been a perfect gentleman." The emphasis on his conduct wasn't lost on Cole. Julia was protecting both their reputations. "Well, we've brought an extra mount," Daniels said. "We can escort you home now, Mrs. Lawrence." Julia nodded, gathering her valise. "Yes, that would be best." Cole watched as she donned her coat and gloves, transforming before his eyes into someone different, more formal, more contained. The woman who had shared her secrets and slept in his arms seemed to vanish, replaced by this poised, remote figure. "Mr. Harrington," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for your assistance. The Lawrence Ranch is grateful." Cole took her hand, feeling the slight pressure of her fingers, the only indication that their parting meant anything to her. "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Lawrence. I'm glad I could help." And just like that, she was gone, riding away with her men without a backward glance. Cole stood in the doorway, watching until they disappeared into the swirling snow, an emptiness expanding in his chest. The Lawrence Ranch. Something about the name tugged at his memory. He'd heard it before, in conversations at the Broken Spur. The Lawrence Ranch wasn't just any property. It was the largest spread in the territory, spanning thousands of acres and commanding respect and often resentment from smaller operations. And Julia was its owner. The realization struck Cole like a physical blow. He'd spent 2 days with the most powerful rancher in the region without knowing it. The woman who slept in his arms, who confessed her secrets in the firelight, controlled an empire. No wonder she felt trapped. No wonder she spoke of responsibilities she never wanted. As Cole saddled Echo for the journey back to the Broken Spur, his mind raced with implications. Julia wasn't just a young widow. She was a force to be reckoned with in the cattle business, a woman navigating a man's world. And she'd revealed vulnerabilities to him that she likely showed to no one else. The trail back was challenging but passable. Cole rode with his thoughts fixed on Julia, her copper hair, her sage-green eyes, the weight of her head against his shoulder as they slept. Would he ever see her again? And if he did, would she acknowledge what had passed between them? Or would she remain the remote Mrs. Lawrence, cattle baroness? Upon his return to the Broken Spur, Cole was greeted with relief by his fellow ranch hands, who'd feared him lost in the blizzard. He offered a simplified account of finding shelter in a line cabin, omitting any mention of Julia. Something about their time together felt too precious, too private to share. That evening, as the men gathered in the bunkhouse, Cole overheard a conversation that caught his attention. "Heard the Lawrence widow was caught in the storm too," said Henderson, a grizzled cowpoke who'd been with the Broken Spur for decades. "Daniels and some boys rode out to find her." "That woman's got more lives than a cat," another hand remarked. "Thomas Lawrence drops dead, leaving her with the biggest spread in the territory, and instead of selling out like everyone expected, she digs in her heels and runs it herself. Runs it better than her husband did, from what I hear," added Henderson. "Doubled the herd size in 2 years. They say she's tough as nails in business. Won't be pushed around by the other big ranchers. Pretty little thing to be so hard-headed," someone commented. "Shame she doesn't know a woman's proper place." Cole felt his jaw tighten at the remark. "Seems to me her proper place is wherever she chooses it to be," he said, unable to remain silent. The men looked at him in surprise. "You sweet on the Lawrence widow, Harrington?" Henderson asked, chuckling. "Just think a person should be judged on their abilities, not their gender," Cole replied evenly, turning away from the conversation. As the days passed, Cole found himself unable to stop thinking about Julia. He threw himself into his work, taking on extra duties to exhaust his body and quiet his mind, but still she lingered in his thoughts. The way she'd looked in the firelight, the trust in her eyes when she shared her secrets, the surprising strength that allowed her to carry burdens few would willingly shoulder. 2 weeks after the blizzard, Cole was sent into town for supplies. As he loaded purchases onto the wagon, a familiar voice made him freeze. "Mr. Harrington." He turned to find Julia standing behind him, dressed in a fashionable green riding habit that complemented her eyes and copper hair, which was now styled in a more elaborate arrangement. She looked every inch the wealthy rancher's widow, except for the uncertainty in her expression. "Mrs. Lawrence," he greeted her, removing his hat. "It's good to see you. And you." She glanced around, noting the curious onlookers on the boardwalk. "I wonder if I might have a word with you in private?" Cole nodded, following her to a more secluded spot beside the general store. There, Julia turned to face him, her composure faltering slightly. "I wanted to thank you properly," she began. "For your discretion and for—" She hesitated. "For your kindness during the storm." "No thanks necessary," Cole assured her. "I was glad to help." Julia studied his face. "You didn't tell anyone, did you? About our time together?" "Of course not." He was surprised she would think he might. "That's private, between us." Relief softened her features. "I thought as much, but I needed to be certain. My position is precarious. As a woman running a ranch of this size, I'm constantly scrutinized. Any hint of impropriety could undermine everything I've worked to build." Cole understood then why she'd been so concerned about her men finding them together. "Your secret is safe with me, Julia," he said softly, allowing himself the familiarity of her first name just once. She smiled, the gesture warming her entire face. "I believed it would be." After a moment's hesitation, she added, "I've thought about you, Cole. About our conversations." His heart quickened. "I've thought about you too." "Have you?" Her voice held a note of vulnerability that belied her confident appearance. "Every day," he admitted. A blush colored her cheeks. "I find myself wishing for another blizzard," she confessed. "For another chance to be simply Julia, not Mrs. Lawrence of the Double L." The Double L, one of the most prestigious brands in the territory. Cole had known the ranch by reputation, but had never connected it to the woman before him. "Maybe you don't need a blizzard," he suggested. "Maybe you just need to make time for Julia." She smiled sadly. "It's not that simple. The responsibilities don't disappear because I wish for freedom." Before Cole could respond, a man's voice called out, "Mrs. Lawrence?" "The banking business is concluded." Julia straightened, her expression closing off. "I must go. My foreman is waiting." "Will I see you again?" Cole asked, unwilling to let her leave without some promise. She hesitated, then reached into her reticule and withdrew a small card. "My hunting cabin," she said quietly, pressing it into his palm. "Sunday next, if you're interested." With that, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her head high. Every inch the formidable Mrs. Lawrence, owner of the Double L. Cole watched her go, the card burning in his hand like a promise. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Cole performed his duties mechanically, his mind fixed on the approaching Sunday. When the day finally arrived, he rose before dawn, saddled Echo, and rode out, telling the foreman he was taking his day off to fish a promising stream he'd discovered. The hunting cabin looked different in sunlight, smaller, more rustic than it had seemed during the blizzard. Cole approached with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. What if Julia had changed her mind? What if she'd never intended to meet him at all, and the invitation had been merely a moment of weakness she now regretted? His doubts vanished when he rounded the final bend and saw a sleek bay horse tethered outside. Julia emerged from the cabin at the sound of his approach, dressed in a simple riding skirt and blouse, her copper hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, more carefree than she had in town. "You came," she said, smiling. Cole dismounted, suddenly nervous. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure," she admitted. "It's a lot to ask, meeting in secret like this." "Not from where I'm standing." He moved closer, drinking in the sight of her. "You look beautiful, Julia." She blushed, gesturing toward the cabin. "I've brought lunch. Nothing fancy, but it sounds perfect," Cole assured her, tethering Echo beside her mount. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Gone were the signs of their desperate struggle against the storm. The roof had been properly repaired, the furnishings rearranged. A checkered cloth covered the small table, laden with bread, cheese, fruit, and a bottle of wine. "This is quite a step up from beans and salt pork," Cole observed. Julia laughed, the sound lightening something in his chest. "I thought we deserved better this time." They ate and talked, falling into the easy rhythm they'd established during the blizzard. Julia spoke of her challenges running the Double L, of the neighboring ranchers who tried to take advantage of her, believing a woman would be easy to intimidate, of the bankers who questioned her every decision, of the endless work to prove herself worthy of the empire her husband had built. "Thomas had no family," she explained. "No one to pass the ranch to but me. Sometimes I think he left it to me as a final test, to see if I could become the person he wanted me to be." "And is that what you want?" Cole asked. "To be the person he envisioned?" Julia's eyes met his. "I used to think so. Now I'm not so certain." As the afternoon progressed, they moved outside, walking along a small creek that ran behind the cabin. Cole told her about his own dreams, the modest ranch he hoped to own someday, the poems he wrote by lamplight when the bunkhouse was quiet. "Would you read one to me?" Julia asked. "One of your poems?" Cole flushed. "They're not very good. I'd still like to hear one." Reluctantly, he recited a verse he'd composed after the blizzard, about finding unexpected warmth in the midst of winter. He watched Julia's face as he spoke, saw her eyes soften and fill with emotion. "That was beautiful," she said when he finished. "You shouldn't hide your talent, Cole. Ranching and poetry don't typically go hand in hand," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Perhaps they should." She moved closer, her hand finding his. "Perhaps we all contain contradictions that make us who we are." Their fingers intertwined, and Cole felt a current of connection stronger than anything he'd experienced before. Without thinking, he leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. Her arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Julia whispered, "I've thought about that since the blizzard. About what it would be like to kiss you." "And?" Cole asked, his voice rough with emotion. "It was better than I imagined." She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes that he hadn't seen before. "Much better." They spent the remainder of the day in a bubble of happiness, talking, laughing, sharing more kisses that grew increasingly passionate. As sunset approached, reality began to intrude. Julia needed to return to the Double L before her absence aroused suspicion, and Cole was expected back at the Broken Spur. "When can I see you again?" he asked as they prepared to leave. "It's complicated," Julia said, her expression troubled. "I'm watched constantly. Everett Daniels reports my every move to the ranch investors. Men who were Thomas's friends and who tolerate my leadership only because he designated me as his successor." "We'll find a way," Cole insisted. "I don't want to lose this. Lose you, before we've even discovered what we might be together." Julia touched his face tenderly. 2 weeks, she decided. Same day, same time. I'll arrange my schedule to be free. With that promise, they parted, each riding in a different direction but carrying the same hope. Their clandestine meetings continued through the spring and into early summer. Every other Sunday, they would rendezvous at the hunting cabin, sharing meals, conversations, and increasingly intimate embraces. Cole found himself falling deeper in love with Julia, not just with her beauty, but with her determination, her intelligence, and the vulnerability she showed only to him. For Julia, the meetings became a lifeline, the only hours when she could set aside the weight of the double L and simply be herself. With Cole, she rediscovered parts of herself she'd buried, her love of art, her sense of humor, her capacity for joy. "I've started painting again," she confessed during their 5th meeting, shyly showing him a small landscape she'd created. "Just small pieces when I can steal a few moments." Cole was genuinely impressed by her talent. "This is wonderful, Julia. You shouldn't have stopped." "Thomas thought it frivolous," she said, the old pain evident in her voice. "He wanted a partner in his business, not an artist." "You can be both," Cole insisted. "You already are." As their relationship deepened, they began to envision a future together, tentatively at first, then with growing conviction. Cole knew that loving Julia meant accepting the double L as part of her life, a responsibility she couldn't simply abandon. And Julia, watching Cole's natural leadership and intelligence, began to see in him a potential partner who could share her burden rather than add to it. But the secrecy of their relationship weighed on them both. Julia feared the reaction of her investors and neighboring ranchers if they discovered she was involved with a common cowhand. Cole worried that their difference in status would eventually come between them, that the gossip would harm Julia's standing in the community. Their concerns came to a head when, returning from one of their meetings, Julia encountered Everett Daniels on the trail to the double L. The foreman's suspicious questions made it clear he'd been watching her movements and had grown increasingly curious about her regular absences. "He knows something's going on," Julia told Cole during their next meeting, her face tight with worry. "Everett's been devoted to the ranch since Thomas hired him 15 years ago. He sees himself as my protector, but also as the guardian of Thomas's legacy." "Do you think he followed you here?" Cole asked, glancing toward the window. "No, I took precautions. But he's becoming more vigilant." Julia paced the small cabin. "Cole, we need to consider what happens next. We can't continue meeting in secret indefinitely." Cole took her hands, drawing her to a stop. "Then let's not. Let's make this public, Julia. Let me court you properly." "You don't understand what you're asking," she said, anguish in her voice. "The moment we're seen together, you'll be subjected to scrutiny, gossip, judgment. People will say you're only interested in me for my ranch, for my money." "Let them say what they want," Cole replied firmly. "We know the truth." "And what about your position at the Broken Spur?" Julia countered. "Do you think they'll keep you on when they discover you're involved with the owner of a competing ranch?" The question gave Cole pause. He hadn't considered that his job might be at risk, but Julia was right. The ranching community was tight-knit and often rivalrous. His relationship with Julia could easily be seen as a conflict of interest. "Then I'll find other work," he said finally. "I've been saving for my own place anyway." Julia's expression softened. "Your dream ranch." "Our dream," Cole corrected. "If you want it to be." The suggestion hung between them, neither quite ready to articulate the proposal it implied. Instead, Julia said, "Give me time. Let me prepare the ground at the double L, speak to the investors, establish my authority more firmly. Then we can go public without risking everything we've built." Cole agreed, though reluctantly. He understood Julia's caution, her need to protect not just herself but the livelihood of everyone who depended on the double L. But patience had never been his strongest virtue, especially now that he knew what he wanted, a future with Julia. Their parting that day was more difficult than usual, tinged with the uncertainty of their situation. Cole watched Julia ride away, her straight back and proud posture revealing nothing of the woman he'd held in his arms just hours before. At the Broken Spur, Cole found himself the subject of increasing curiosity. His regular absences had been noted, and speculation about a sweetheart in town had begun circulating among the hands. Cole neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, but his reticence only fueled further gossip. Matters came to a head when the foreman, Silas Thornton, called Cole into the ranch office one evening. "Harrington," Thornton began without preamble, "you've been a good worker, reliable. But lately, you've been distracted. These mysterious trips every other Sunday. Where are you going?" Cole hesitated, unwilling to lie but unable to reveal the truth. It's personal, Mr. Thornton. The foreman's eyes narrowed. Personal enough to affect your work? Henderson says you nearly let a heifer wander off during branding yesterday because you were wool gathering. It won't happen again, Cole promised. See that it doesn't. Thornton leaned forward. And one more thing. There's talk in town about Julia Lawrence looking for a new foreman. Everett Daniels is retiring, apparently. Cole kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. Julia hadn't mentioned this development. The double L pays better than we can, Thornton continued, watching Cole closely. But I'd consider it a personal betrayal if any of my men jumped ship to work for the Lawrence widow. We may be smaller, but the Broken Spur has principles. We don't need her Eastern money or her fancy breeding programs. The warning was clear. Cole nodded, understanding that his position was more precarious than he'd realized. The rivalry between the ranches ran deeper than he'd known. That night, unable to sleep, Cole made a decision. He would speak to Julia at their next meeting about making their relationship public, regardless of the consequences. Living in secrecy, constantly looking over their shoulders, wasn't the foundation for the future he envisioned with her. But when Sunday arrived, Julia didn't appear at the cabin. Cole waited, concern growing with each passing hour. By mid-afternoon, he was convinced something was wrong. Julia had never missed a meeting, never been more than a few minutes late. Torn between worry for her safety and fear of compromising her privacy, Cole finally decided to ride to the Double L. He would approach openly, inventing some pretext for his visit if necessary. The Double L Ranch house was imposing, a two-story structure of hewn logs with a wide veranda and glass windows, far grander than the modest Broken Spur headquarters. As Cole approached, he saw activity around the barn and outbuildings, hands moving with purpose that suggested something unusual was happening. A young stable boy took Echo's reins when Cole dismounted. "Help you, mister?" "I'm looking for Mrs. Lawrence," Cole said, striving for a casual tone. "Is she available?" The boy's expression turned solemn. "Mrs. Lawrence ain't seeing nobody today. She's took sick." Alarm shot through Cole. "Sick? How serious?" "Dunno. Doctor's been here since yesterday, though." The boy glanced toward the house. "Mr. Daniels might tell you more, if you got business with Mrs. Lawrence." Cole spotted the foreman emerging from the barn, his weathered face set in grim lines. Taking a chance, he approached the man directly. "Mr. Daniels," he called. "Cole Harrington from the Broken Spur. I understand Mrs. Lawrence is unwell." Daniels regarded him suspiciously. "Harrington? What brings you to the Double L?" Cole had prepared a story about delivering a message, but facing Julia's foreman, he found himself unwilling to add another lie to the tangle they'd created. "I'm concerned about Mrs. Lawrence," he said simply. "We're acquainted." Something in Daniel's expression shifted, recognition, then confirmation of a suspicion. "So you're the one," he said quietly. "The one she's been meeting at that cabin." Cole felt the blood drain from his face, but didn't deny it. "How is she?" Daniel studied him for a long moment, seeming to weigh some internal decision. Finally, he said, "Pneumonia. Came on suddenly 2 days ago. Doctor says the next day or two will tell." The news hit Cole like a physical blow. "I need to see her." "Impossible," Daniel said firmly. "No visitors. Doctor's orders." "Please," Cole persisted. "She shouldn't be alone." "She isn't alone," the foreman replied. "I've been with the Lawrence family for 15 years, young man. I was there when Thomas brought her home as a bride. I was there when he died. And I'll be here now." His tone softened slightly at the naked concern on Cole's face. "She's a fighter, Mrs. Lawrence. Stronger than she looks." Cole knew he couldn't push further without potentially causing a scene that might harm Julia. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Will you at least tell her I came? That I'm thinking of her?" Daniels hesitated, then gave a short nod. "I'll tell her." It was the most Cole could hope for. He returned to the Broken Spur, his mind filled with worry. The thought of Julia ill, perhaps gravely so, was unbearable, and being unable to be with her, to comfort her, made it worse. For 3 days, Cole existed in a state of anxious anticipation, performing his duties automatically while his thoughts remained with Julia. He considered returning to the Double L, but knew another visit would raise too many questions. Instead, he wrote her a letter, pouring out his feelings and his fears, but had no way to deliver it without arousing suspicion. On the 4th day, as Cole was mending fence line far from the ranch house, a rider approached, Everett Daniels. mounted on a handsome black gelding. Cole straightened, heart pounding. "Mr. Daniels." "Harrington." The foreman dismounted, tying his horse to the fence. "Thought I might find you out here." "Julia?" Cole couldn't keep the question contained. "How is she?" A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's weathered face. "On the mend. Fever broke yesterday. Doctor says she's past the worst of it." Relief washed through Cole, so powerful he had to lean against a fence post for support. "Thank God. She's asking for you." Daniels continued, watching Cole closely. "Seems quite insistent about it." Hope surged in Cole's chest. "When can I see her?" "That depends," Daniels said, his expression turning serious. "On your intentions." Cole met the older man's gaze steadily. "I love her, Mr. Daniels. I want to marry her, if she'll have me." Daniels nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. "The Double L is more than just a ranch, Harrington. It's Thomas Lawrence's legacy. He built it from nothing, through sheer will and determination. When he married Julia, he thought he was getting a partner who would help that legacy grow. Instead, he got a city girl who wanted to paint pictures and read poetry." Cole bristled at the dismissive characterization. "Julia has run that ranch successfully for 3 years. She's doubled the herd, improved the bloodlines, and expanded the operation. I'd say she's honored her husband's legacy while creating her own." "Yes," Daniels agreed, surprising Cole. "She has. Despite everything, the doubters, the challenges, her own inclinations, she's become exactly what the Double L needed." He fixed Cole with a penetrating stare. "The question is, what do you bring to this equation? A cowboy with dreams of his own small spread? How does that align with the largest ranch in the territory?" The question struck at the heart of Cole's own doubts. What did he have to offer Julia, really? He wasn't wealthy, didn't come from an influential family, had no experience managing an operation on the scale of the Double L. "I bring myself," he said finally. "My love for her, my willingness to learn, to work, to stand beside her through whatever comes. I know the difference in our situations. I know what people will say, but I love Julia for who she is, not what she owns." Daniels considered this, then reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "She asked me to give you this. Said to tell you she's sorry she missed your meeting." He handed the note to Cole. "The Double L hands eat dinner at 7. Mrs. Lawrence dines at 8, usually alone. The housekeeper leaves by 9. With that cryptic information, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Cole holding Julia's note. The paper contained just a few lines, written in a shaky hand that spoke of her recent illness. "Cole, I've been thinking about our future, about what I truly want versus what I've been trying to preserve. Come to me. Tonight. Yours." Julia. Cole stared at the words, his heart racing. The invitation was clear, as was Daniel's implied permission for Cole to visit the Double L that evening. What had passed between Julia and her foreman during her illness? What decisions had she made about their future? That evening, after the broken spur hands had settled in for the night, Cole saddled Echo and rode toward the Double L. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, the air sweet with the scent of summer grass. He approached the ranch house from the west, as Daniels had suggested in their brief conversation after he'd delivered Julia's note. The house stood dark except for a single lamp burning in a downstairs window. Cole tethered Echo to a hitching post and approached quietly, anxiety and anticipation warring in his chest. Before he could knock, the door opened, revealing Everett Daniels. "She's in the study," the foreman said without preamble. "Still weak, mind you. Don't overtire her." With that, he stepped past Cole into the night, leaving the door open in tacit invitation. Cole entered, finding himself in a spacious entrance hall more elegant than any ranch house he'd previously visited. He followed the glow of lamplight to a room at the rear of the house, where he found Julia seated in a large armchair, a quilt draped over her lap despite the summer warmth. Her face was pale, her copper hair loose around her shoulders, but her eyes brightened when she saw him. "Cole," she said, extending her hands to him. "You came." He crossed to her in 2 strides, taking her hands and kneeling before her chair. "Of course I came. I've been half out of my mind with worry." Julia squeezed his fingers. "I'm sorry. It came on so suddenly. One moment I was fine, the next I could barely breathe." She touched his face. "Everett told me you came, that you were concerned." "Concern doesn't begin to cover it," Cole admitted. "When I heard you were ill, that it was serious. He shook his head, unable to articulate the fear he'd felt. I had a lot of time to think, lying in that sick bed, Julia said, her gaze intent on his face. About what matters, about what I want for my future. She drew a deep breath. I nearly died, Cole. The doctor didn't say as much, but I could see it in his face, in Everett's. And all I could think was that I might die without ever having truly lived as myself. Always playing a role, always carrying Thomas's dream instead of pursuing my own. Cole listened, hearing the determination beneath the weakness in her voice. I don't want to hide anymore, Julia continued. I don't want to meet in secret, stealing moments of happiness while pretending to be someone I'm not the rest of the time. Her eyes searched his. I want a life with you, Cole. A real life, in the open. Joy surged through him. That's what I want too. But what about the double L? The investors, the neighboring ranchers, all the concerns you had before? Julia smiled, a hint of her old strength showing through. I've had a long conversation with Everett. He's been more than a foreman to me. He's been my advisor, my protector. He knew about us, had guessed weeks ago. He was waiting for me to trust him with the truth. And now? Cole asked. Now he understands that my happiness matters as much as the ranch. And he sees something in you, Cole. Potential he thinks the double L could use. She touched his cheek tenderly. The position of foreman will be open soon. Everett is retiring at the end of the summer, for real this time. Cole blinked, processing the implication. You want me to become your foreman? I want you to become my husband, Julia corrected, a blush coloring her pale cheeks. But yes, I also want you to help me run the double L. Not as Thomas's legacy, but as our future. A future where there's room for my art and your poetry alongside the business of ranching. For a moment, Cole was speechless. The offer, both personal and professional, was more than he'd dared hope for. Julia, he finally said, are you proposing to me? She laughed, the sound brightening the room. I suppose I am. Rather forward of me, isn't it? Cole grinned, lifting her hands to his lips. Extremely forward. Scandalous, even. He grew serious. Are you sure about this? People will talk. Let them, Julia said firmly. I've spent 3 years trying to be what everyone else wanted. It's time I chose my own path. Her expression softened. If that path leads to you, Cole Harrington, I'll consider myself fortunate indeed. Cole rose from his kneeling position, pulling Julia gently to her feet. He wrapped his arms around her, mindful of her recent illness, and kissed her with all the love and longing he'd carried since that blizzard day when fate had brought them together. Is that a yes? Julia asked when they parted, slightly breathless. Yes, Cole affirmed. To everything. Husband, partner, foreman of the double L. Whatever role you need me to fill, as long as we're together. Julia's smile was radiant. I just need you to be yourself, Cole. That's more than enough. Their courtship became the talk of the territory, as they'd known it would. Some whispered that Cole was after Julia's money, that the young widow had been taken in by a handsome face. Others suggested Julia was simply lonely, seeking any companionship after years of solitude. But as weeks passed and they were seen together at church, at community gatherings, even conducting ranch business side by side, the gossip gradually gave way to acceptance. Cole left the Broken Spur, despite Thornton's disapproval, and moved into a small cabin on the Double L property. He worked alongside Everett Daniels, learning the complexities of managing a ranch of such size, absorbing the older man's knowledge like a sponge. And each evening, he courted Julia properly, their relationship deepening as they discovered new facets of each other in the light of day, away from the secrecy of the hunting cabin. They were married that autumn in a simple ceremony at the Double L Ranch house, with Everett Daniels giving the bride away. Julia wore a gown of ivory silk, her copper hair adorned with wildflowers instead of a traditional veil. Cole, in a new suit that still made him feel slightly uncomfortable, couldn't take his eyes off her as they exchanged vows. That night, as they stood on the veranda of what was now their home, gazing at stars over land that stretched to the horizon in every direction, Cole marveled at how far they'd come from that blizzard-bound cabin. Do you ever think about it? He asked, his arms around Julia's waist. How different our lives might be if that storm hadn't hit when it did. Julia leaned back against his chest, her head finding its familiar place beneath his chin. I believe we would have found each other somehow, she said confidently. Some things are simply meant to be. Like a cowboy falling in love with the owner of the largest ranch in the territory? Cole suggested, smiling. Exactly like that. Julia turned in his arms, her expression serious despite her smile. You know, when Thomas died and left me this ranch, I thought it was a burden, a cage I'd never escape. Now I see it was also a gift. Without the double L, I might never have become strong enough to know what I truly wanted. And what do you want, Mrs. Harrington? Cole asked softly. Julia's answer was a kiss, filled with promise and possibility. The first of many they would share under the vast Montana sky that had once separated them and now united them in a love as boundless as the territory they called home.